What's up, YouTube? This is your friendly neighborhood movie nerd, about to give you guys everything that's going on in the world of movies and TV. And today we are here to talk about a studio that is probably the best at what it does. Easily, to me, the studio of the past decade. And it's strange because on this week's podcast episode, we talked about how Netflix has kind of changed the game by taking niche properties and making them mainstream through its use of algorithm and its non-marketing. But this is a studio that, to me, I feel like is taking that model and actually doing it right. This is a studio that has proved, without a doubt, to actually be willing to take risks when it comes to telling new and interesting types of stories. A studio that has brought a lot of legitimacy back to the independent film. Today we are talking about none other than A24. Producing such revolutionary hits in the genres of sci-fi, horror, coming of age, and many others, as well as in a way almost inventing some genres of their own. This studio has taken the idea of the independent film and pushed it to the next level. So today, I'm going to be discussing and breaking down my top 10 favorite movies from this independent studio. These are my top 10 favorite movies from A24. Under the Skin, the story of an alien woman posing as a human who goes around luring men into her van, only to have them transported to a dark, otherworldly space and enveloped by a strange liquid. 2014 is an interesting year for A24, because it's the only year of their existence that didn't really have the It movie to talk about, and as a result, it allowed for them to be very experimental early on, with some of their other 2014 films including Enemy, Lock, and A Most Violent Year, to name a few. But this is easily their most experimental and interesting one that they put out that year, tackling themes of identity, sexuality, predator versus prey mentality, all while constantly keeping the audience on their toes as to what's going to happen next. Scarlett Johansson's performance as the woman is her most subdued since Lost in Translation, and it's that subtle nuance that allows the more risque scenes to have that much more rich subtext. It's a docile piece about what appears docile on the surface versus what appears underneath, and even that mentality gets flipped on its head. It's one of the lesser seen and more experimental A24 movies, but one that at least everyone should watch. The Florida Project, the story of a young girl living in a rundown motel right on the cusp of Disney World in Florida as her and her single white trash mom struggle to survive. The thing that makes this movie so compelling, but at the same time so off-putting, is that it's one of those perfect slice-of-life movies that simultaneously feels way too close to home. The excellent symbolism of living right on the edge of Disney World, but never actually being able to go there, is a great visual metaphor for the poverty these characters and others in real life deal with. And because of the movie's tone, it allows for the happy-go-lucky fun moments to mesh right in with the even more tragic moments that happen later on. It's a movie about regular people just trying to survive, and even though they're not all the most likable people, there's an approachability to the residual innocence of these characters that helps to make this movie endearing, tragic, and one of A24's best. The Lighthouse, the story of two lighthouse keepers in shantytown-era England who discover that the lighthouse they're responsible for may end up being a prison for their own subconsciousness. Robert Eggers' fascination with historical peoples and settings continues with his sophomore effort, this time focusing on 1600s English folklore. While his breakout film, The Witch, garnered almost universal acclaim, this film upped the ante by choosing not to give the audience any answers to the mysteries plaguing Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and instead chooses to explore all different sorts of folklore, containing allusions to pirate folklore and Greek mythology, to name a few. On top of that, the film's black and white color palette adds an extra layer of mystery to this already tense bottle movie. Between this and The Witch, Eggers has almost created his own subgenre within the pre-existing horror genre. It's the spiritual successor to The Shining, which is ironic considering that the actual sequel, Dr. Sleep, came out only a month later. Filled to the brim with all sorts of new frights, visual metaphors, and haunting imagery, as well as a few fart jokes to flesh out the tension, this movie will leave you wondering whether you were truly sane or just a prisoner of your own consciousness. American Honey, the story of a young girl who runs away from her desperate living situation in order to join a group of traveling newspaper sales kids as they embark on a journey across America. Andrea Arnold is a director whose American debut was long in the making, with her debut short film Wasp actually winning the Academy Award for Best Live Action Short in 2005. Once again continuing her exploration of coming-of-age films about teenagers in poverty-riddled parts of the world, this 3-hour-long epic follows Sasha Lane's character as she finally begins to forge her own path in life, only to discover that, shocker, it's not nearly as easy as it looks. The newspaper sales crew that she joins are just as lost as she is, but the key difference of note is that unlike her, they've accepted that they're lost and are just enjoying it. And if the crew is the Lost Boys of Neverland, then their Peter Pan is without a doubt Shia LaBeouf, finally making a return to the big screen after a much-needed, albeit strange, break from acting. The mystery, allure, and wild nature of these characters, as well as the various landscapes they travel to, help to highlight the true sense of the American dream, and how that idealistic naivete is the same stuff that allowed for this country to be what it is. Good Time. The mainstream introduction to the Safdie brothers tells the story of a young criminal attempting to find $10,000 to post bail for his severely mentally handicapped younger brother, who finds himself trapped in Rikers Island after a heist gone horrifically wrong. Despite the Safdies getting the recognition that they deserved with Uncut Gems, this was the movie that first showed certain audiences that they were the new Scorsese/De Palmas on the scene. This movie feels like a cross between Midnight Run and After Hours in all the best and worst ways. As we follow Robert Pattinson's Connie Nikas on his quest, we're drawn into this nightmarish journey that shows the underbelly of the city and all its colorful, crazy characters and personalities. The usage of non-actors in this movie gives it a surge of legitimacy as well, and the anxiety-inducing mishaps that the characters find themselves in gives new meaning to the word tension. Not to mention that besides all the non-actors in this movie, co-director Benny Safdie gives one of the best mentally handicapped performances since Leo DiCaprio in What's Eating Gilbert Grape as Connie's younger brother Nick. It's a heartbreaking movie, but the word thrill ride has never been more accurate nor more elevated than it is here. Mid-90s. Jonah Hill's directorial debut follows a young kid as he moves to a new town in California with his abusive older brother and single mom, who joins a group of local skater kids and learns to find himself. This is actually one of 2 A24 movies that I got to see early. And the thing that stood out the most is that this movie has one of the best senses of genuine, raw emotion. Stevie, aka Sunburn's struggle in this movie is nothing that the audience hasn't seen before, but the refreshing take that's presented here makes this feel like a completely new coming-of-age story. The 4:3 aspect ratio almost makes this film feel like a time capsule, transporting you back to a simpler time with stakes that, in all honesty, probably weren't that big, but felt like they were because you were a kid. What's interesting here, too, is the fact that this type of story is typically reserved for that of a high school age kid, but here they choose to go even younger, barely even middle school age, and it just makes the story that much more endearing. On top of that, the visual aesthetic, set design, and usage of non-actors to fill out the supporting cast really helps to flesh this world out and make it feel even more authentic. It's a great bottle piece and a great flashback to simpler times. Swiss Army Man. A24 has always been known to give some of the strangest stories the big screen treatment, but this one might take the cake. Paul Dano portrays a drifter stranded on a desert island who's about to kill himself when he discovers a corpse that has the ability to propel himself across the water with farts, uses boner as a compass, and above all else, talk. Their journey throughout the woods allows for one of the strangest and most genuine of buddy duos to emerge. It's safe to say that this movie's very strange premise was a big reason why this wasn't exactly the most marketable movie. On the surface, it looks like a very strange cross between Castaway and Weekend at Bernie's, but underneath is an endearing tale about friendship, not letting exterior appearances define you, and self-discovery. And despite Paul Dano being the credited lead, the real star of this movie is Daniel Radcliffe, who proved that in the 5 years since the last Harry Potter movie that he has not lost any of his incredible charm or acting ability, and proves to not only be an incredible physical actor, but also quite the comedian as well. This is one of those movies that has an absolutely ridiculous premise, but lures you in with its incredible charm, wit, and endearment, so that once you're finished, you almost forgot that you just spent an hour and 40 minutes with a guy talking to a farting corpse. Ex Machina, the story of a young programmer who's invited to a reclusive billionaire's house in order to view his pet project, designing artificial intelligence and putting it in a robotic body. As the movie to put A24 on the map, it makes sense that they would take a Jurassic Park / Blade Runner-esque story and place it on a much smaller scale, but even that comparison doesn't do this movie justice. Alex Garland had already gained a reputation for writing some of the most groundbreaking sci-fi scripts of the 2000s, penning Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later and Sunshine, as well as overseeing post-production on 2012's remake of Dread, but all those movies paled in comparison to his directorial debut. Early on, A24 had established that they were not afraid to go in new and different directions with storytelling, but the reason this movie keeps coming to mind is because it takes a sci-fi premise that for the most part people are very familiar with and flips it on its head. Because rather than being a traditional story about our mistreatment of robots as second-class citizens, Garland instead opts to go for the darker side of that, showing how that very same humanity that we take for granted can be used against us by the things that we imbue with said humanity. Because the trick that this movie pulls is that while we think we're watching the story of a human falling in love with an android, we're really watching the story of a robot who sees that, recognizes said emotion, and uses it to her advantage, always being 12 steps ahead of her human captors. In addition, the movie also makes great use of the Turing test, the human concept of determining whether artificial intelligence is capable of human consciousness, to the point where we can't even tell that it's artificial, in a whole new way, because in this instance, we are the second-class citizens to them. Moonlight, taking place over 3 time periods following the life of Chiron, a black kid growing up in the 80s crack epidemic in Miami, Florida, throughout childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Taking once again a setting that A24 loves, Florida, and examining it in a whole new light, director Barry Jenkins and writer Terrell Alvin McCraney with this movie reinvented the idea of the coming-of-age story. They take all the trials and tribulations of growing up black in America and create a very personal story that they tell in a series of vignettes, almost like a poem, which makes sense considering this was based on an unpublished play that McCraney wrote entitled In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. And to add further subtext, they take it one step further by asking what, in addition to growing up as a minority in poverty in America, it's like to grow up and not even knowing your own sexuality in a setting that could not have been more averse to that mindset. This movie deals with a lot of themes in such mature and introspective ways, never once going for the showy route, and always keeping the viewer in Chiron's head and allowing us to see the world through his eyes. What's even more impressive about this movie is that in addition to being a narrative that takes place over the course of a few decades, it also serves almost like 3 separate stories strung together, with each sequence in his life taking the place of one of the traditional 3 acts. It's a narrative technique that I always like seeing and I wish was used more often. All of that taken into account, and this movie managed to win Best Picture in easily the greatest Oscar upset / debacle of the last decade, specifically because it was against traditional Oscar darling La La Land.
It's not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
Before we get to our number 1 choice, here are some honorable mentions. uncut gems. What happens when you mix the directors of Good Time, a slick, grimy, postmodern 21st century New York City, a gambling addiction story, and Adam Sandler? Only one of the last truly great original American crime epics. Benny and Josh Safdie take everything that they learned making Good Time, as well as their decade-long filmography, in order to give us a crime thriller unlike one we've seen before. This movie takes all the best bits of Scorsese, De Palma, and John Cassavetes and puts a modern-day spin on it, following Adam Sandler's Howard Ratner, a degenerate, gambling, basketball-watching diamond store owner who is in debt to 30 different people but cannot stop to save his own life. Ratner is the source of his own pain and misery, but unlike anyone with this kind of a problem, the only thing he's really capable of at this point is making things worse for both himself and the people close to him. This movie is incredibly filmed and manages to escalate tension in a way that has not been put to camera yet. The audience is sweating throughout this movie with Sandler right up until the final shot, and if you're able to get a breath in, kudos. On top of all that, the constant non-stop action of New York around him really makes the city a character in of itself, as opposed to Good Time where the city was rather passive, only coming out in bits and pieces. Here it is in full-on force, with every character talking as loud as they can, car horns blaring, and various noises all helping to make this even more intense and in your face than it already is. Sandler gives probably his best performance yet as a man who's literally between a rock and a hard place, but he plays it almost like a tragic hero, despite constant reminders that he has brought all of this on himself. If Good Time was the Safdie's midnight run, then this is their Rounders, but even that comparison doesn't do this movie justice. It's the best for a lot of things. The best for Sandler, the best for the Safdies, the best New York movie in a long time, the best homage to the 70s, the best decade of film, one of the best of 2019, but above all else, the best A24 movie. And that was it. Those were my top 10 favorite A24 movies. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. What were your top 10 favorite A24 movies? Be sure to also to leave a like and click that subscribe button for more awesome content from this channel. And as always, people, watch more fucking movies.